Hey guys, today we're going to be showing you how to take apart, clean, and put back together a Gamecube controller. A list of the materials you're going to need on the screen here as well will include your controller screwdriver, for in this case we're going to be using a tri-wing, water in a container such as a cup, isopropyl alcohol as well in a container or cup, glass cleaner as an optional part of this, paper towels in order to dry off the buttons and various different pieces we're going to be taking off of the controller, toothpicks to be able to get into some of those hard to reach places and be able to make sure we can get all of that grime and dirt out of your controller, as well as Q-tips to assist with the same thing as the toothpicks. So the first step for this process, you're going to want to flip over the controller to expose all the screws on the back of the controller plate. Using your tri-wing driver, you're going to want to unscrew the 6 screws in a zigzag pattern to make sure that all of them get out around the same time. All these screws are the same, so you can use the tri-wing for all of these. Next, you're going to want to pull off the back shell and place that off to the side. We'll get to that in a little while here. Next, you're going to want to turn the motherboard over, and you should see the thumbstick and button pad. It's a gray thumbstick and the yellow C-stick as well. You're going to want to peel those off. They should come off nice and easy. Just pull them straight off the motherboard of the controller. They may require a little bit of force as well, so just take your time and make sure those come off nice and smooth. The next step is to place the motherboard off to the side, and with that you want to make sure that it's in an area where there's no water and a minimal amount of static to reduce any damage you're going to do to the motherboard, if any. Then we're going to look at the front shell of the controller, the part with all the buttons on it, and you're going to want to peel off all those pads. Make sure you get all those off and put those over to the side. Then you're going to want to flip over that same face of the controller and make sure to take all of the buttons out. It's easier to cup it in your hand, which is why we suggest flipping over the controller with your hand on top of it. Okay, for the second part of these instructions, you're going to want to make sure to clean the controller. That's the main purpose of this, and we'll go into the steps for that now. So step 1 is to place the thumbsticks and buttons and pads in a small container of water. Let these buttons sit and make sure they get nice and wet in there, and then you can move it over to the second container containing the isopropyl alcohol. Let these sit in there for about 3 minutes or so and make sure that they dry thoroughly to ensure that when we put it back together, there's no remaining moisture. Additionally, for this step, you're going to want to use a toothbrush or some other sort of scrubbing device to make sure that you can get all of the dirt and grime out of those as well while they're in the alcohol. Following this step, you're going to want to take some Q-tips and toothpicks and both halves of the controller, and the front shell and the back shell. You're going to want to dip those Q-tips in alcohol and then go all along the outer edge of the shells, where we're going to be picking up the largest buildup of the grime and reducing a lot of the dirt that's on the controller. You may need to use a lot of Q-tips for this step, and that just depends on how dirty your controller is, so take your time because this is the part that matters the most. After you've reduced most of the grime that's on the controller, check the edges, and if there's still some grime that you couldn't get out with the Q-tips, use the toothpicks and scrape the shell to remove, just as the step before. After that's all finished, look inside the shell and see if there's any last remaining grime, and you can use a dampened Q-tip to clean the inside. Make sure to get those screw holes on the back of the shell and use alcohol to pull all that up. With the top shell, be sure to get in the button and thumbstick slots. There's some grime that usually sits in there as well. Place the shells off to the side and grab the motherboard. Grab a new Q-tip, and for this step you're going to want to use some water or alcohol. That one's totally up to you. Make sure to rub the Q-tip on the sensors to make sure that you can get all of the grime that's sitting below the buttons. Make sure you can get all that off. Make sure that those button sensors are dry if you used water in the first step, and use the alcohol to clean off all the remaining grime. Alright, now for the reassembly. So once everything's been cleaned, you're going to take this time to be able to put your controller back together, and we're basically going to be reverting the steps from the first set of steps of this process. So step 1 for this is to take the front shell and begin to place the buttons back in place. So that'll be the A, B, X, Y, and the start button right in the center. You want to make sure that all of those go back into their original positions. Next, you're going to want to take the pads that you peeled off and put those back into place above the buttons, and make sure that the black spots face you, or the divots, to make sure that the pads are on the right orientation. Once this is done, you can go ahead and place this shell off to the side. Next, you're going to want to grab the motherboard and gently place the thumbsticks back into position. And just to recap, that was the gray thumbstick and the yellow C-stick. After you've put the sticks back into place, you can take the motherboard and the front shell and make sure to line up the motherboard holes with the shell and put it back into place. This is going to make sure that the motherboard fits nice and snug back into the controller casing just as you took it out before. After that's done, you should be able to take the purple button, which is the Z button, and put that back into position as it was before. Make sure to tap the button to make sure that it's nice and springy. You don't want the button to lose any of its rigidity that it had before. As an additional step, make sure that the white arms on the motherboard are all the way up. This should be on the left and right side of the rumble pack. They're white clear plastic and they stick straight up. After that's done, place the back shell back on and there should be no resistance. Also make sure that it clips into place nicely and there's no gaps in between the front and back shell of the controller. Once that's done, you can go ahead and put the screws back in and make sure to do it in a zigzag pattern to make sure that all of the screws go back into place and are nice and firm on each side of the controller. With this step done, you should have a nice and clean controller and all should be well. Hope this guide helped you guys out, and take it easy.